Um, my title, Applying Linguistics and Theorizing Practice in EAP, is related to a lot of thinking that I've been doing lately. And so my alternative potential title is a bit of a knockoff from this book by Haruki Murakami, What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. And I thought I could have said what I think about when I should be thinking about something else, because I tend to get, I'm doing one task, and I tend to get distracted by, oh, that links to this, and this links to that, and it brings me around to these ideas. But hopefully it won't come across as the mad ramble of a mad woman, but hopefully there will be some structure to it that you'll be able to take away. Okay. So two ideas that I've been thinking about for quite some time that are rattling around in my head come back to two different people that I highly respect. Andy Gillett, as you know, former chair of BALEAP and very active member for many, many years. And Andy used to just drive me round the bend when he would always say, there's no such thing as English for general purposes. Everything, everything is specific in teaching. And on the one hand, I agree with him, and that's true, but it's really unhelpful. It doesn't really help us. I mean, some of the discussions about general and specific, I think, just verge on the silly. But it is an issue, and it's got me thinking a lot about the notion of general and specific. It's got me thinking a lot about, well, everything in our life is specific, but we have to be able to learn to generalize to new situations. And so that's kind of, he spurred me into that mode of thinking. So as much as he irritated me when he was saying it, I appreciate the fact that he's pushed me to think differently. Okay. And Dudley Reynolds is teaching at Carnegie Mellon in Qatar, and he is the incoming president of TESOL. And quite a few years ago we had a discussion because TESOL has this problem where TESOL and AAAL, the American Association of Applied Linguistics, always used to be scheduled in the same city back to back. And for a variety of reasons, AAAL decided to go solo. They didn't want to be, because TESOL's the bigger conference, they got to do the choosing. And the result of that, though, is that where previously a lot of people attended both conferences, so the researcher, Norbert calls them the researcher conference and the teacher conference, but you used to get a lot of overlap between them. Now that they've gone separate, TESOL is much the poorer for the lack of the research input. And you notice it because once some researchers stopped coming, then other researchers stopped coming because they started to feel like, I'm not getting anything out of this. Why am I spending so much money to go to a conference that I don't go to, that I don't get anything out of? So we have, in that situation, and in a variety of other situations, a gap between teachers and researchers. And at the last PIM in Sheffield, at the Sheffield Hallam PIM last November, we were talking a lot about scholarly activity and the notion of scholarly activity. And those conversations have continued through events that Alex organized for EAP in the East Midlands, through blog discussions and things. And it's something that's it's been rattling around in my head for quite a long time. Okay, and I've just pushed the drawer in with the mouse on it. So, okay, we'll take it up here. Okay, so first of all, I want to then say, again, I'm looking at this from welcome to my fellow EAP practitioners. And I've chosen the term practitioner very specifically, okay? And some of you are here because these are pictures that I've taken off the BALEAP website from the recent conference in Leicester, okay? Okay? Although I have a variety of roles in my university, when I talk to people and they ask me what do I do, I self-identify as an EAP teacher, even though the majority of the work that I do these days is actually teaching on our MA in ELT. When people ask me what I do, I say I'm an EAP teacher. You then have to go through the, well, what's that? Blah, 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 explanation and stuff. But it's where I feel most at home, and it's the area that really has pushed my own personal inquiry more than any other aspect of what I do. Okay. So what I wanted to think about today was what informs our EAP practice. Okay. Think about that for a moment. Have a 2-second chat with your neighbor. What informs your practice? Okay, time's up. Time's up. Okay, clearly you have quite a lot to say. Okay, so things do inform your practice. Okay, I'm going to simplify just because that's what I'm able to do with my use of graphics. I'm not too such a whiz, but I think one of the things that informs us as EAP teachers is our personal experience. And the longer in the tooth we are as EAP teachers, I think a lot of us, the only thing that we had to really inform our practice was experience, because there weren't courses out there for us to take to learn about how to do EAP. Happily, that situation is changing, and there are more and more courses, and there are more and more books and things that we can go to learn about being EAP teachers. But experience informs teaching materials and methods, and then those materials themselves actually play a very important role in informing how people teach. A lot of people learn to teach from the materials that they get. Okay. Another potential way that our EAP practice can be informed is by following along with academic theory. Starting from academic theory, looking at research that has been done based on academic theory, taking those findings, trying to apply them to teaching methods and materials, and then practicing that in actual teaching itself. And I was pleased today to hear lots and lots and lots of references to theory and research findings. Okay. Although what you can see here is, again, I've been using the SMART art, and what I went to was the cycle in the SMART art, and what you have is an incomplete cycle. Neither of these are a full loop or a full cycle. And it's that full cycle that I really want to focus on today. Okay. I think when we look at theory and practice loops, one cycle that we see in academia in particular is academic theory, research findings, and the research findings go back, they're evaluated, critiqued in somebody else's literature review, and then they just feed right back into academic theory, and they may never ever cross over with teaching. Okay? In other parts of the university, that's called research. And that's all that's really looked for, is that that's called research. Okay? Another way that we can look at the theory and practice loop is that experience guides our teaching, and then we evaluate our teaching, and we use our evaluations and our self-critiques to make changes to our experience. And that can be informal, but when it's a bit more formalized, that's called action or practitioner research. Okay? And there tends to be something of a wall between the two where we're not seeing a lot of crossover. It doesn't mean that that wall is impermeable, because as you can see, I chose a wall that isn't very long and isn't very high. It's a wall I think we can climb over, or I think it's a wall that we can go around, but we have to make an effort to do that because there isn't an obvious link between the two. And that makes me think about the role of impact. And impact is a buzzword in universities right now. It's for my husband, for his annual reviews, he has to fill out. My husband works in the English Studies department at Nottingham University. They have to show impact in terms of research, grant capture, which was mentioned this morning, and the way that their work impacts on the wider world. Okay? So impact is all the rage, and anytime you look at journals these days, you see some reference to it, because down here, all the journals are telling you about what their impact factor is. And in my university, there's actually a group of people in the research department where when we're going to publish, we're supposed to go to them, and they're going to guide us into what journal to put our papers in based on the impact factor, which isn't really how I understand how you place an article in a journal. You sort of look at the relevance to the audience and the population rather than just the impact factor. But the impact factor is out there, it's important, okay? And we can see that when we think about relationships between teaching and theory, we can see that there are some links going on in relation to theory, research, and materials. And if you can show that you're getting your work into materials, that would be one element of impact, okay? And this is an example from the conference at Leicester, where Sheena Gardner reported on theory, genre theory, that they did research on to come up with the BA corpus, and then how they've taken the insights from the BA corpus and used those to create materials for the British Council Learn English website. So there's a theory, research to materials link going on here, okay? Other ways that we can see theory going to materials is by people who I would classify as mediators, and that's kind of how I see myself. People like Owen just said to me, oh, you're much more research active than I am. And I think, well, actually I see myself as a mediator, as not so much a researcher, but the person in the middle who is taking the time to read the research and then trying to mediate from that into materials that will go out to a wider audience. So rather than that research finding just sitting in somebody's implications for teaching section of a journal article, we're trying to do something with it, okay? And I think both of our textbooks are occasions where we can see that we've tried to do that. And there's plenty other out there, but these were two that I could easily find pictures of, okay? We also, though, can think about theory to teaching, and this is an example of a journal article that my husband and I published in ELTJ way back in 1995 about vocabulary notebooks. Some of you may have actually seen it. Okay, and one thing that's really interesting about it is that in this, what we did was we looked at the psychology research on memory, and we produced guidance for how you could use vocabulary notebooks in your teaching. And then we left it. Okay. Luckily for us, it wasn't just left there. Other people, okay, this is much smaller than I would have expected it to be, but this is an article that was published in Language Teaching Research by Jody Walters and Neville Boskirk, and what they did was they did an intervention study with vocabulary notebooks at a university in Eastern Turkey with students who were non-English majors, and to see what kind of take-up there was with the vocabulary notebooks. And the teaching intervention it's a really fantastic teaching intervention where it got the students to make the notebooks and bring them into the classroom and make really good use of them. Now, one of the things that they were looking to find out about was this pronouncement that Norbert and I had made in our article about how vocabulary notebooks are good for developing learner autonomy. Well, Jody Walters and her colleague, what they found was that the students said, oh, vocabulary notebooks are fantastic. We learn so much. And they gave all sorts of quotes about what the students said they learned from using them. But the intervention was only 4 weeks. So then they said, well, okay, now we're not going to, now that you've learned about them, would you carry on using them? Well, if I was an English major, I would. But since I'm not, no. Or I can see that it would be useful, but unless the teacher checks it, I'm not going to do it. And so this is a real clear indication that comes back to us that says, well, actually, what we put out there isn't actually working as well in practice. And now, when we talk about vocabulary notebooks, we have to rethink this whole notion about the fact that they develop learner autonomy, because this is a case where it's not happening. Another study was done by James McCrosty, also published in ELTJ, and he looked at using them in Japan, and he identified a number of problems that the students had in trying to actually make and keep, like they had problems with selecting the vocabulary, they had problems with in selecting what to put onto the word cards, etc., which indicated that our nice and simple, just do this, blah, 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 really wasn't quite as simple, and that there's a lot more that needs to be thought about in terms of taking these research findings. And it's only because these research findings came back into the literature that I know about it from my own personal experience that they don't work as easily as we think they do. They tend to, you get some quite mechanical note cards and things where students just open their dictionary and copy things out of it unless you really work at it. But if I just know that and I don't give it back to the field, then people are still sitting back there thinking in 1995, go forth and do vocabulary notebooks, and we haven't moved on. So it's because these teachers have come back and said, well, actually, it didn't actually work the way you said it would. And we need to go back and rethink it, okay? So this is what I want to think about is in terms of impact, in terms of EAP. What impact do we as EAP practitioners have? What I've seen today is that there are a lot of us who are doing our own research or going to the theory, going to research findings, and putting it into practice in our materials, trying to work with it in terms of fitting it into how we teach. But how many of you have found that when you do that, it works the way that the person who wrote the implications for teaching intended it? Not so many hands, okay? So we're seeing that we need to finish that cycle. It's not enough for us just to critique our own research and go back into our teaching methods and materials, because I think we're not making when we do that, we may make an impact in our own classroom, but we're not making the impact that we could possibly make if we got our findings out to a wider audience. So we come to BALEAP, we give presentations at PIMS, we give presentations at the conference, but are we going far enough? And this is what I'd like you to ponder. You're going to work out what I think, but I'd like to have a little bit of discussion time, perhaps, where we can hear what you think. Okay? So we have the theory-practice loop, but we're not closing this part. The evaluation and critique isn't going back to evaluate the theory. So we keep that separation between the researchers and the teachers because our teaching is research-informed, but their research isn't teaching-informed. Okay? And so I think what we're seeing, part of the reason for this is natural. We have teaching specializations, okay, a couple of teachers at the BALEAP conference, but you can see here in the back, we have our two plenary speakers, okay, who we invited to come and speak to us in plenary at our conference to endow us with their research knowledge. Okay? But when was the last time you saw a teacher invited to be a plenary speaker at a research conference? Anyone? Again, no hands going up. Okay? So we have teaching expertise. We have a whole lot of knowledge. They have research expertise. They have a whole lot of knowledge, but I don't think that we are capitalizing on that because we're working over here and they're working over there, and it's not very helpful. Okay? We need the teaching to start to inform theory. We need it to be driving some of the questions that are being investigated in theory. Okay? If we think about some characteristics of empirical research has pre-testing, research intervention, post-tests. They have large sample sizes in order to enable generalization. They work on incrementally building up to a better understanding of the phenomenon under question. And increasingly in research, we're starting to see papers that are doing meta-analysis to try to bring together disparate studies that have been done to get a better picture. Okay? If we think about what's an intervention study, well, I think teaching is the intervention study that we do every day. Okay? And what I'm wondering is, can we find a better way of capitalizing on this than what we have so far? Okay? Now, I'm going to use an example of the academic reading circles. Okay? And there was a presentation about that today. Okay. Now, I first heard about these when I went up to the St. Andrews EAP conference a couple of years ago, back in 2014, and Susie Cowley-Hazelden talked about them. When I was listening to her presentation, I thought, wow, that's really interesting, that's really great. And she just started me thinking in so many different ways. And one of the things that she did was she just put phones on the table and videoed and recorded the students' interactions. Okay? And when I was sitting there, I was thinking, how do we evaluate whether or not this is really effective? The students are really engaged, or appear to be. There's a lot of talk going on. The students are busy. How do we know it's really effective? Okay. How would we collect the data to do that? What criteria would we use to analyze it? Did group conversations develop over time? Did the students just have the same conversation about a new article every week? Or were they actually becoming more insightful week after week? Okay. What could this tell us about teaching? There's dialogic teaching going on, there's collaboration going on, there's learner autonomy that's hoping to be promoted. We hope that some of this will transfer. These are all things, these are all big theory questions where we could take what we're finding from this to try to feed back into the theory. Okay? What could it tell us about how people to learn to read academically? How could it help us to inform not just teaching, but also theory about learning how to read? Okay? So we have this idea that we should do action or practitioner research, but it just focuses on the local. And I heard, and we can't always generalize from one case to another. So I heard Susie talk about this at St. Andrews. And Susie referenced Tyson Seaburn from Canada. So I read the stuff that was on his blogs, etc., and I went to his talk at IATEFL. And then today, I went to Julie's talk, where she also talked about using academic reading circles. And Julie seems to have come to it from a very different direction. She didn't, as far as I'm aware, she didn't know that Susie was doing this. She may or may not have been aware that Tyson Seaburn was doing this. And so I sort of think we're sort of running in the same direction, but not entirely, And how do we capture this overlap? Is it just going to be luck of the draw that I happened to go to that talk and then I went to that talk and I was at an event where I could hear another talk about it so that I could pull it together? I think we're leaving it too much to luck. Okay. And if I think about relating today's talks to theory, and I can go back to ARC, David Camerani talked about SLA, and he talked about pair work. Well, group work, pair work, interaction, all of that are elements that could be investigated in relation to what's going on from an SLA perspective in the academic reading circles. Carrie also talked about SLA, and she talked about a perspective of SLA called being on the edge of chaos, and I would think that an academic reading circle is one of those ways where we're trying to stop our students from, falling over the edge in a negative way. And there were loads of principles that would apply to this. Chris Smith talked about using ideas from the academic reading circles to inform the more authentic assessment that they have here. I missed out a U, but fostering a directed motivational current, is that kind of what's going on in relation to what we might be wanting to see with an academic reading circle? And then seeing reading as part of the academic repertoire, okay? I'm also linking it back to the PIM at Reading, which was on reading. And one of the things that was coming up was, you know, in an academic reading circle, we want to foster criticality. But in talks that went on there, people were saying, well, students don't actually get to the point of being very critical until they're in the second or the third term, because they have to have something to use to be critical about. In Jennifer Spencer's terms, in terms of what? Everything. You know, critical in terms of what? That a focus on strategic reading means that students are reading very truncated pieces of work and not reading widely, which is what we are also trying to produce. So I could see really clear threads running through that day as well that aren't being captured except in my head. Okay? And we could go on with further thoughts about today. Lots of discussion about feedback. I realized that I needed to use the loo before I came in here, so that I didn't actually, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not finishing. So this is why you're seeing not such good typing at the moment. Okay, but there was lots of talk about feedback. Hannah and Alan talked about agile. There were lots of talks that I wasn't able to go to, but have been tweeted about extensively. You know, and they were talking about interrupting students mid-task, to think about self and peer monitoring. How could we capture all the different elements of people talking about feedback today and pull it together, rather than it just be if you had the luck of the draw to turn up into things and are pulling it together yourself? Now, action research is getting a lot of support these days. Cambridge English Language Assessment, formerly known as Cambridge ESOL, or for some of us, UCCLS, okay, they're actually funding action research projects in the UK and in Australia. Simon Borg is leading the UK versions, and Anne Burns is leading the Australian ones. They have teachers working together on themed action research projects, and then they report on these in the Cambridge Research News. I think it's a missed opportunity, because again, you've got somebody reports on this one, somebody reports on that one, and we have the specific, but there's no work to take it to the general. There's no work to say, how do we pull these ideas together? And again, what can we do? And who are we? Are we BALEAP as an organization? EAP as a profession? What can we do? Okay, so I'm thinking about synthesis, okay? And yesterday in the exec meeting, we were talking about the fact that, well, sometimes when you look across the PIMs, you can see that talks are being given that are very similar than have been given at other PIMs. Well, when is that not a bad thing? When it's actually a good thing? Because it's showing that a lot of people are coming to similar understandings in different isolated circumstances. And rather than going into it and thinking, oh, I've heard that before, it's like, well, how can we actually kind of crowdsource this knowledge, okay? How do we capture it? What should we do? And I was thinking about, why do we need to care about this? And it fits sort of with what David was talking in terms of, like, I did a little bit of a SWOT analysis of EAP in the UK, and I think we have a formidable knowledge base regarding international students' experience, language learning, the relationship between language and content that isn't necessarily being leveraged in terms of theory. Okay. Weaknesses, we aren't part of the academic mainstream life, so we're not necessarily being supported in this to do the research. Experience is a main driving source still for learning EAP. We have a technician approach. In many cases, we're encouraged to take a technician approach to language and literacy, and too often we just talk to ourselves. Okay? We're sitting here talking to other EAP teachers, rather than saying, well, we're not just learning about EAP, we're learning a lot we know a lot about language learning, how people learn. We have longitudinal courses, we have short courses, we have intensive courses, we have distributed learning in our in-sessional courses. So we have opportunities, I think, in that the EAP community is growing. There's a lot of new technologies that can enable us to share practice. And what I'm really pleased to see is that more and more people in our community are doing PhDs and staying in EAP. It's no longer the job you do while you're doing your PhD, and then when you get your PhD, you go off and get a real job in a real academic department. People are staying and using that knowledge, okay? Threats to us are the commodification of education by government and just worldwide, the neoliberal element, the fact that the government is interfering in terms of language levels. We're still somewhat looked down upon, even within our own field. People say, oh, EAP, the CLIL people. We're not EAP. That's not us. EMI. Oh, no. Don't mistake us with EAP. Okay? And the fact that both students and staff view content as subordinate to language learning. I found this quote quite luckily, I think. I was looking for things about action research, and what I think it really speaks to what we want to do, is it's the fact that action research can have impact, but it's different from what's commonly considered impact. I'm going to shut up for a second and let you read it, because I think you'll do that more quickly than I can do reading it to you. It's the bit in the middle here. It's about how can we be more systematic? What can we do to be more systematic, to pull together what we're doing and finding? So if I go back to my two ideas, Andy's got me thinking about the general and the specific. Dudley's got me thinking about the gap between research and teachers. And on the topic of frameworks, what kind of framework might we need to have more impact with EAP? Within academia, but also within the wider field of applied linguistics. The things that we're learning about language learning, the things that we're learning about higher education, how can we have a better impact? Okay? So I think we might want to think about creating new roles in EAP. Okay, we already have people talking about having us become literacy specialists who collaborate with content specialists. Is there a place for, instead of saying to everybody, you need to be a specialist in both research and teaching, which isn't possible for many people given their workloads, can we look at ways of perhaps developing research specialists who can work together? The whole point of them is to work together with teachers. If you have a big center like you do here, that one person's job could be about going to teachers, talking about the questions that they have, working together to develop research studies where it's collaborative, and the specialist knowledge about the research comes from the research specialist, and the specialist knowledge about the teaching context comes from the teacher. I want teaching-informed research, not just research-informed teaching. Okay? One example where I've seen someone go through the whole feedback practice loop, theory research loop, is Ursula Wingate. She talks about it in her book, where she's trying to promote inclusive pedagogy and academic literacy approach. She uses genre, SFL, and academic literacy perspectives to create materials. She teaches those materials, and then she actually researches the teaching. And, nice chance to do a little product placement, but the next PIM is on in-sessional EAP at the LSE in London on the 19th of March, and Ursula Wingate will be the plenary speaker there. It also happens to be the BALEAP AGM, so we hope to see you there. So I'm not going to have a lot of time to do that because I have only 1 minute to do this, but 1 minute left. But I think there's a lot of questions where we can investigate our current thinking, where we need to go back and fill this feedback loop, and also where we can have impact beyond our own teaching, beyond EAP. Owen gave a talk several years ago about the difference between ELT and EAP, and she kindly lent me the slides so that I could use them for a talk I did with English UK. And in that, she's comparing the methodology book that Rose Sr. wrote and the focus on delivery, and she's comparing it with an EAP textbook that focuses on content. And this is just the blurb from the back of the book talking about all of the things that are being discussed in Rose Sr.'s book. How we can manage tricky students, how we can get students on side, how we can enhance the learning experience. And what Owen was arguing at that point was that EAP prioritizes content over delivery, and that's what we're about. Okay? But I just had a conversation with one of my colleagues who's delivering in-sessional support to first-year accounting students in the first semester. And engagement is a huge problem. But it's not just a problem being faced by us with in-sessional classes. It's a problem being faced across the university, to the extent that at our university we now have something called the student dashboard, where they are logging every time the student used their swipe card to go into the library, every time they log on to a computer, every time they go into a building, every time they access the virtual learning portal. And you can get individual student metrics to show how engaged a student is. Okay? And so, what is engagement in EAP? What role does methodology or delivery have to play in EAP? Are we creating another unequal dichotomy between language and content and methodology and content? So again, when Owen gave her talk before, I sat in the audience and went, yeah, I agree. But now I'm rethinking that. And again, I think we could feed into the wider university literature about engagement if we thought about it. So a way forward, this is the English UK website, maybe, showing the Action Research Award Scheme. Should we be looking to develop a partnership with someone friendly with more money than us who might help us to do this? Or could we do it ourselves? Okay? And finally, another way forward is we are seeing, if you go to the JEEP website, we are seeing that practice is getting more focus, is going to get more focus in the JEEP journal, because Liz Hamp-Lyons has stepped down as editor, and there's going to be a prize. But what do you think? Okay? You have a couple of minutes to ask questions, give me some thoughts, or again, use the Twitter, use the discussion list, and tell me what you think. Give us some ideas. What could we do? Do you agree with me? Do you think we need to do something? Thank you. Honestly, anybody have a question or a comment? Or you want to, yes, Bella. No. I don't mean I think that her legacy is that she wants to see practice having a higher role, and what she was asked what kind of legacy she'd like to have, and she asked for a prize to focus on practice in JEEP. Okay. So it's not that the journal's getting better because Liz is leaving. No, it's that Liz is trying to leave a legacy. Okay. Okay. That's it. You all have trains to catch. Thanks for seeing you, and we hope to see you all in Bristol in April 2017. Thank you.